Thanks for coming. Most of you know me, but if you don't, I'm Mike Gonella, the chair of the horticulture department and teacher in the department, the only full-timer. And I passed out these cards that tell you about our program. I mean, a lot of you already know, but we have 4 degree emphases. You can get an AS in environmental horticulture with an emphasis in an ecological restoration or nursery management or landscape contracting or landscape design. So we have a few students in here that are probably covering the full spectrum of those things. So if you don't have any idea of the types of careers you could achieve with that degree, the panelists are going to better speak to that than I would, and definitely they're going to say more than what's on this card. But there's a little bit of information like that on the back. And if you are already in the program and you're still wondering what kind of classes you have to take to graduate, we have information online about that you can access through a link here, and then I have these little blue brochures over there that can tell you that. But it's, as you'll find out from the panelists, it's a growing field. Labor market. Is that funny?
He grows stuff.
Oh. The labor market reports show that landscape maintenance, landscape design, nursery business is still growing in Southern California area. So there's more and more jobs. During the recession, it was not as hard hit as a lot of other disciplines or professions. Even though people couldn't remodel, they still wanted to change their landscapes. And people always have landscapes to maintain. So I know all of them. Well, Tyler least of all, but not least interested, but worked with them, and Adam used to teach here, and they're all a great group of people that really, if I was gonna, it makes me excited about horticulture and landscaping too. They're all really smart, sharp, ambitious people who have done really well in their trade, and I admire them, and I'm glad they're here, especially because they probably just, got off a job and rushed over here. So hopefully they'll be inspiring to you too. So that's it.
The program overview today is pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and I'll be introducing our panelists. They'll be answering some questions that I throw out to them. I'd like each of you to give a brief description about where you work and the type of place that you work in. So I did a little brief description, but...
Where we work?
Yeah, like I know you work at your own company, so maybe you can say that. And what do you do there?
Oh, I work everywhere. We're primarily building contractors, but I still do quite a bit of horticultural work. And we're from Santa Barbara to, I've got a bunch of North County work. I've had projects that have run in the Bay Area and down in LA, and we've sent crews out as far as North Dakota. So it's a lot of opportunity if you're in construction. The horticultural aspect of the work that we do, I had to give up on as a main focus of the work early on in the career because it was just not paying the dividends that I thought I could get out of the training I had. So unfortunately, the horticulture education that I spent a lot of time in getting a lot of, excitement about and whatnot, sort of fell by the wayside earlier in my career than I would have liked. So nowadays, I'm really trying to push hard to get back as a full-time landscape contractor and do more with the trade. So it's a great career. I've loved it. I've had 25 years of building the business, but we really had to branch out and do more general contracting and masonry and that kind of thing, just because I couldn't quite kind of bite off as a landscape contractor, at least initially in the local area. It was a little difficult and a little inhibiting. So my story as a horticulturalist is it supplements our business, but it's not necessarily the main thing that we do, which is not to discourage any of you guys from sticking with it. Again, I just found that that early on, I was needing to pay the bills and get payroll made, and I kind of fell back on the concrete work and the carpentry and the things that I'd been trained for prior to getting my degree.
Well, that's a bummer.
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying it.
If I could jump in.
That's reality.
Company though, because you can do everything. You can install.
Yeah.
Your company installs the hardscape and does the planting and irrigation. So there's not a bunch of different sub-consultants we're working with. It's like you're foreman and you guys do the whole installation. And it's nice on our end that you have the whole package.
So Tyler, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I work at Gonella, Lotusland. It's a 37-acre nonprofit botanic gardens. It started out as really a nursery back in the late 1800s with one of the families that bought the property. Story goes that they kind of wine and dine the local merchants that would come into port and ask for seed, plants, cuttings, anything that they can get their hands on from different parts of the world, and started to grow these plants at Lotusland. Another person came in the scene that bought the property and pretty much was doing the same thing. That's how we ended up with such a great collection of very mature plants that you don't see around in this area. Madame Ganowalska bought it in 1941. She didn't start cultivating the gardens until 1946, and she was intent on just collecting plants. She didn't have a horticultural background, so she had people or staff that helped her with that aspect of it. So we have a very notable cycad collection, bromeliads, cactus. It's a pretty cool place. I've worked at a couple other botanic gardens, and the work at Ganowalska Lotusland is really something. It's a very special place to be. Right down to the woman that designed it and cultivated it and made it what it was. So I've kind of worked myself. I'm in horticulture, but I've worked myself out of the gardener position, which is good and bad. I do miss being out in the gardens a lot of the times. A lot of my day is spent managing people behind the computer at a keyboard or sitting in on a meeting. But not to discourage you, like Adam was saying, and getting in the industry. I got in it for the plants. I'd always thought I'd be a greenhouse grower. And once I took an internship at Longwood Gardens, I discovered people that were in the industry for plants and not just bulk plants and shipping things out, but really the unique plants in the industry. And that's what nonprofit public gardens are about, a lot of the arboretums as well. So glad I'm in it.
Thank you.
So I worked for San Marcos Growers. I've been there 36 years. Yeah, long time. Didn't start out, as we mentioned, at the top of the heap, but came in as a production manager. I'd been working at a retail nursery in Santa Barbara at the time, and was very interested in plants. And we are a wholesale nursery. We sell about half of our sales go to other nurseries, and the other half goes to the landscape industry. What we're seeing right here, the contractors and architects and end users like the state of California, parks and zoos, Disneyland, places like that. Botanic Gardens, thank you. We ship from pretty much the Mexican border up to Santa Rosa, where it's burning right now, and pretty much along the coastal corridor. And so we're actually a trucking firm also. Have about 50 employees on that 20 acres. My day is spent administering those 50 employees a lot and being a referee half the time. And also writing for our database that, as was mentioned, we developed a database in about 1990 and went online with it about 1995, and it's just kind of grown ever since. And it's pretty much kind of become a horticultural database. We write about the plants we grow and the ones we've grown in the past. Kind of as, it started as an advertising thing for us, but it's also kind of an information source. And I still keep my hands on the plants mostly, a lot by writing about the plants and looking at them. And we have about 1,800 different plants in the process of growing. And we try and propagate and grow most of them ourselves. Some of them we do buy in. We do a little bit of breeding, but mostly it's growing plants that we have found or others have found for us. And that's about it.
And I started, I guess I went backwards. I actually was at UCSB, Environmental Studies and Ecology major there. Graduated in 90, or thought I graduated in 91, couldn't find a job, and then ended up coming back to City College to finish up a couple English courses to transfer back and to get into horticulture. I love plants. And I guess according to my mom, I designed my first garden at age 6. Really enjoyed the curriculum here, worked at the Lifescape Garden, was the City College intern at Lotusland for 6 months, and then also at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, was an intern there. And so really got to work under some really fantastic horticulturalists. When I was at Lotusland, it was when they were switching over to organic gardening. And so it was a really, really exciting time to be there. We're really renovating the soil and learning about the importance of the soil. And also, the design and how all these aloes work together, and how to give them the best upbringing, if you will, in the soil. And so I think that, from there I ended up working at city parks at Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens. Again, I got into that position through the Hort department here, and worked at Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens, taking care of the drought-tolerant landscape there. So got intimately familiar with all of those plants, and then happened to meet this landscape architect, Grant Castleberg, who had worked on that park. And since I knew how to draft and I knew my plants, they needed somebody to help out with planting plans, and that's how I got into the design end of things. And so I got to kind of, Jerry Sortame used to call it paint with plants. And so I got to be an artist where I would take these plants and create gardens. And for me, it was really, the horticultural background and the sustainability, and sort of thinking about it from an ecological perspective. Where did all of these plants come from, and am I going to put them together, and did they come from similar parts of the world, which is where his database comes in handy, so I can find out where's this native to? Is it comparable to something from New Zealand, and can I throw a California native plant in there, and can I make this little sort of designed habitat from plants around the world into a garden that's going to be resistant to pests and not take a bunch of water. So it's sort of how I fell into the career. And then they changed the state laws, and so then I had to go back and get a master's in landscape architecture so that I could get a license. And I think I was working for the firm for 5 years by the time I went back and got the license or the degree. And then I got to work for Bob Perry down in LA, which was a great experience, and he literally wrote the book on drought-tolerant plants. And so when the economic downturn hit, that's when I started my company and went out on my own. And it was also kind of coincided with the drought. And so I really kind of found that niche in drought-tolerant, sustainable landscapes. And I still do a lot of habitat restoration. In fact, I was working on a wetland mitigation restoration plan right before I ran in the door. So I still have my fingers in all of these things that I learned, and I think the foundation here, you kind of go on these crazy paths, but I think this program was the foundation of it for sure. And I get to buy his plants and have him install my work, so it's fun.
Thank you. So Kim, since the mic is there, we'll just keep it there and start with you and ask you, what are some of the key things that helped you achieve your career goals? What kind of advice might you give the students here if they want to go into the field? And what are some of those key stepping stones for you that helped you land where you are today?
Gosh, I think I just worked hard, and I really love plants. I have always been excited and passionate about plants, and love working with them, love taking care of them, love now designing with them. So I think having that passion and drive, it's not, you work hard, but at the same time, when you love what you do, it's not hard work, so to speak, and it just flowed, I think. But I think a quest for always learning and expanding my knowledge, and it feels like in this field, the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much you don't know, and so it's always able to grow and expand and learn. I think that's important.
Yeah, I would second that, just always learning and observe what's going on around you. I mean, there's so many learning lessons you can do just walking down a street, and people always go, well, what should I grow, you know? And you always say, well, look what your neighbors are doing, look what's successful, look around you. And I think that's kind of how I got into it, just looking at the world around me and looking at plants and liking them, of course. But I agree with you. I'm constantly learning. I'm still learning, and I hope I never stop learning about the plants. And as far as what I would do from this program or opportunities, we have always looked to this program for people to hire, and that is something that we've hired a number of you out of it. My partner for many years, for 35 years, was a graduate of this program, and several of the people that's still working for us, including my current production manager, is a graduate of this program. So it's something that we recognize there's a lot of good learning going on here. So.
Kind of same thing, just loving the plants, and I started out young as a kid. I was always outside doing something, and you talked about career and finding your career. I felt fortunate that I always kind of knew my career path. Always in the plants, always outside doing something. Never knew I could go to horticulture until I got into high school, and I was in FFA at the time. Told me you actually go to school for horticulture, so I did that, and it was all about the plants. I mean, a lot of times people would say you probably end up liking people or liking plants more than people. So I think sometimes that's true. But yeah, just hard work, open mind. Like I said, I didn't think I'd go into public gardening. Didn't really know that much about it until I took an internship. And when I got there, I realized this is where I wanted to be. And just learning the plants, I went from the West Coast to the East Coast and learned a whole different plant palette. And now I'm from the East Coast back to the West Coast, and I'm learning and relearning everything that I knew before. So the learning process is great, and you never learn it all, and things are always changing as well, from soil biology to new plants. It's an ongoing thing, and just a fun field to be in. And working in horticulture, everyone's been great. It's just a great field to be in.
I think all of our sentiments are about the same. As you're caught with a bug when you're young, and it just stays with you forever. And some people are plant people, and some people are not, and that's just, it's not good or bad. I was one of those kids that had to be called in at dark because I was still messing around with some project in the yard. The neighbors got wind of me as a little kid, and I started doing projects for them. And it just built, and I can't remember, even from my youngest days, I really cannot remember not being employed in horticulture doing very similar stuff to what I'm doing today. So it just seemed natural, even in college, that I was working and doing other things besides horticultural trades and skills, but I kept coming back to it, that even though there were other diversions out there, that love of plant material and horticulture just wouldn't go away. So, and I don't think it's something that you're necessarily, you're born with, or you have it or you don't. There are a lot of people that later in life they really come into the horticultural profession, and they do quite well, and they're very happy. So. Don't feel like if you weren't born with some religious fervor to be in the plant world, that it's not for you, It also affords me the ability to do a lot of things that I want to do, which in some careers is not always as readily available. And what I mean by that is I can set my own hours, maybe these guys up here are in that same place in their profession, but even when I was young, it was nice to be able to, if I needed to get up early and go to work and get off early, the business afforded that luxury, if you will. So it's nice as a horticulturalist. It's a very flexible. It's like the plant material is never going anywhere, you know. And that's the one thing I do like the most about our landscape part of the work we do is it's a lot more flexible and forgiving, and you know, building somebody's home or remodeling their kitchen. A lot of times those timelines, the desire to please and get people back in their kitchens or back in their homes, sometimes is not necessarily a fun thing and you know, pleasurable part about what we do. But it's very rare that anybody gives us a hard time about landscape installation.
So you talked a little bit about some things that you prefer or maybe don't prefer about your work. Over the years, what are some of your favorite things? Maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, and some of the things that maybe you don't enjoy doing so much, like you were talking about personnel as opposed to working with the plants. So we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's that saying of affinity with plants is not necessarily an affinity with people. I find that my interpersonal relationships with employees and whatnot are probably the things I could do without. I've got about 55, blows up to 80 employees, and I spend a lot of my time just putting out fires, tamping down personalities, keeping people working, you know, keeping people from stealing from each other and that kind of thing. That's really the negative part about running a business. The positives, yeah, really, I think it's you never stop learning, and every day there's a new opportunity to learn something new and have a new discovery. And I find now that I take a much greater pleasure in that than I ever used to when I was younger. I wish I hadn't taken that for granted, that I'd maybe been a little more open to the experience of every day learning something new and not just going through the motions.
Same thing, managing people. I have a great staff. I mean, the Lotusland staff is phenomenal. And getting everyone to work together in a garden and agreeing on how to prune a pittosporum. You know, you have 6 different ways to do it, and sometimes you just have to set someone up or just walk away and let them hash it out, or pull 5 people off and let the one person finish it. So it's not really a negative, but it's a part of the industry that you have to deal with. For me, sometimes it can be rewarding because you may get an employee who you feel like you should probably just get rid of, and you end up spending 6 months at a time, maybe mentoring them a little bit, and they end up being a great employee. So it can be rewarding as well. They're few and far between, but it can happen. And then the positive thing for me is just walking out of my office and going into the garden, spending time with my employees, because everyone has a story or, you know, a life, and you get to know them a little bit better. I took arboriculture in college, and one of the things I liked, I haven't been in trees in a while, but one of the things I liked a lot was after either a storm or something like that, we were able to climb and do different parts of horticulture that I didn't do before, that I didn't study in, but kind of progressed as I went along and learned by doing. But yeah, just being in touch with nature, I think going outside, and that overflows into sometimes my personal life and hiking and camping and doing things like that. So I think overall the positive aspects of horticulture are greatly outweigh the negative, if there really are any negative for most people. And like I said before, just the industry themselves, everyone I've met in the industry has been a positive experience. It's a lot of fun.
I wanted to back up just a hair because of something you said earlier about not knowing that the horticulture existed for you when you were early on, and there is a big movement right now, and in Longwood Gardens is part of it, the Seed Your Future, which is really an important thing about just letting people know that horticulture exists, because I forgot what the exact figure was, but it was close to 90% of the high school kids have never heard the word, and it was really kind of something eye-opening to me. And I actually started more in environmental education than I did in horticulture, and it wasn't really until I took a class at UCSB by Bob Haller. It was Botany 103. It just kind of turned my world around, and it can happen. So I mean, I was a junior, senior in college before I really got enlightened back to plants. I mean, I was always involved in nature and such, but so don't give up, and don't if you want to change course down the road, you can always do it. Now that being said, I think the positive things again are dealing with the plants, but also the people. I mentioned the difficulties in staff and such, but they're good people, and we have an opportunity also to see quite a fair number of our customers that come into the nursery, and that's always good. I mean, I love to get their stories, I love to talk shop, and see how things are going. So I think people are, it's a good and bad side of my business. But the most enjoyable thing is really talking to plants with other people.
To say I love it when I get to go to his nursery and ask about plants. And we get caught up a half an hour talking about something. It's great. It's the running the business part is hard, doing the books and all that stuff, because I do a lot of that myself. But I took the small business administration class through adult ed, and learned how to write a business plan and do the whole thing, and jumped right in. That part can be trying in the long hours, but I do love what I do. I love my work, so it's sort of worth it. And Aaron here was one of my employees, and gave him his first job in landscape architecture, and now he's teaching here at City College. So it can be really exciting and rewarding to see people grow and flourish in that way. But I'd say my favorite part still, even though I'm a landscape architect, is when the plants finally arrive on site and I'm laying them out. Like, that's still my favorite part. Even though expecting the forms and looking at all the hardscape you build along with the garden, it's still the plants for me is my favorite part. And it's really fun just moving them around and seeing it all, seeing the garden finished once it's installed is really thrilling. And there's a lot of gardeners out there that could use help learning how to properly take care of plants and how not to overwater them. And I think there's a huge need, especially now since we're moving away from lawns and we're moving into different types of plants. It's like, a lot of these plants don't want extra summer water, and there's a lot. I think the industry's changing. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for people to get into that portion of it. And so it's nice when you find one of your designs that's being well maintained. That's a really exciting, and it's really sad when you see a design that hasn't been, a garden that hasn't been cared for, that can, through your little children.
Thank you. So when we start out in our careers, some things happen because of intentional choices that we make. And some things just happen because they happen and we're in the right place at the right time. And I would like to start with you, Kim, and ask you, for these folks here, what are some things that you might have done differently, or what are some things you are really glad that you did on your career journey trajectory?
Oh, wow. That's a crazy question. I've told this story a couple times and people are always impressed by it. But I kind of, had Bob Perry's books and was excited about it, and found out that he had a business near Cal Poly Pomona, and I just moved there. I was looking for a job, didn't know anyone. I just wrote him a letter and said, hi, I really admire your work, I love your books. If you ever need a drafter, tell him a little bit about myself and send him my resume, and so he called me back and said, come on over, let's just chat. So went over and we totally hit it off and just started talking about plants and kind of hanging out in his backyard, and at the end of the conversation, it's like, so, you know how to draft, huh? And so it's kind of taking those risks, and you know, doesn't hurt to kind of take that risk, send the letter, knock on the door, pick up the phone, whatever it is. But the reward might be a good thing, and you know, why not take that risk, and why not put yourself out there? Because you know, if they reject you, so what? You know, there's something else down the road, I think. That was the, I don't know.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
Basically, what you touched on was what we call, it could be related to an informational interview. So, I mean, you threw your resume out there, you said a little bit about yourself, but you weren't necessarily looking for a job. You were just trying to make a connection? Is that
Make a
true?
connection, and,
Yeah.
and it, you know, I had to make money somehow, and
Yeah,
you
hoping
know,
something
just-
came of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things we encourage people to do if you are interested in working for a particular place is to do an information interview, which we have a handout on in the Career Center and on our website. But basically, you're not asking for a job, you're just connecting with somebody and asking, what do you do? It's kind of like what we're doing here today, and finding out what people do. People love to talk about what they do and usually love to help people and can spare 20 to 30 minutes to do that. So we'd love to, so if anybody's interested in that, you want to connect with people, of course we've got great people here, but we can also connect you with other people in the industry. Go ahead, Randy.
Well, things I would do differently. I kind of wish I had kind of found my vocation a little earlier, but what I didn't. But when I did find it, I started going environmental studies and botany, and going to work at a retail nursery in town. I got really into working with plants and actually looking at the taxonomy of the plants. I shared this with an older gentleman, nurseryman who worked there, and he and I conspired, and every day we looked at all the plants in the nursery and talked about them. And I got to know the plants very well that way, and apparently impressed somebody that recommended me to a job just out of the blue, because I got called by San Marcos growers, and they said, I heard you know your plants. I didn't know who they were, and it was kind of an interesting situation, but it was, you know, it was worthwhile pursuing, I think, at the time. They were brand new in the industry. They had just opened up a new nursery, and so I took a risk there. So, I mean, a little bit of risk, but also the fact that somebody that I had just been talking to in a retail nursery recommended me, I thought was pretty cool, and that's, you know, that's something I thank them to this day for, and so.
I can't really say what I would do differently. I've been thinking about that as Randy and Kim were talking, and I think the trajectory, or somehow I was just lucky in what I did. But I can say, I had a couple really good mentors, one especially Jim McDaniel, who I met at Longwood. And I think just meeting more people in the industry, and if I had to do it over again, there's some people in the industry, or at Longwood particularly, that I spent time with them, and we're still in contact with each other, but I think I probably could have learned a little bit more from some of these individuals in horticulture. I met Jim there, and I stuck with him pretty tight, and he's helped me through my whole career. He was, I think maybe he's 9 years older than me, but he had been in it. He had been in it on the East Coast for quite a while and was pretty deeply rooted in the industry and knew a lot of people. So I was fortunate to hang on to him, but there are other people I could have clawed onto as well, and maybe I would have done something different in my trajectory, but yeah, just hanging on to people and keeping a good contact with them, I think, is probably one thing that I'd probably do differently, or that hopefully I'm doing differently now.
I'll tell you guys what I've told the San Luis Obispo freshmen and seniors in their senior seminar in their classes. When I get the opportunity, the question usually comes up of what should we be doing, and it's something that I did a little bit of, and looking back now, I wish I had done a lot more of, and that is number one, accounting and small business. management, I think, are sorely missed in most people's educations. The other thing I tell them that they need to wake up and look around and have an understanding that for the most part in our industry, there are two languages that we speak, and just to have mastery of English as the sole language and the way you communicate, you're missing out on a pretty large amount of people that are quite knowledgeable and have a very good understanding of plant material and the business that you're in. So if you're passing by your opportunities to take Spanish and you're not fluent already, I would get there. So I had both Spanish and business in school and paid attention knowing that I would need that. And fortunately, I grew up in a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood in Los Angeles growing up, so I didn't really have to worry about being able to communicate. But I can tell you that I see the struggles in both of those areas and other people that are in businesses related to mine now, and I feel for them. I feel for their struggle and their anxiety over missing those two skills. But I'll tell you the one thing that I would have done different, and I am so grateful that Kim, who I knew prior to her master's and now after the fact, I had the opportunity to get a master's degree in landscape architecture and passed on that in my mid-20s, and I regret that extremely. So to this day, I really wished I had finished at Cornell and had stuck it out, because at this point, I probably wouldn't have had any business setbacks, and the experience of having stayed out in New York a little bit longer would have, I think, paid dividends. And as a lot of people in this business can attest to, it may not seem like a degree or a certificate or an accomplishment or an award at the time is not meaningful, but looking back over the breadth of your career, again, not getting a master's degree, I think was a mistake. Had I not gotten my bachelor's of science up at Poly, I think that would have been a mistake. Had I not gone and studied in Australia, that would have been a mistake. So, not everything was, not every opportunity was squandered, but I did miss out on a couple. So even here at City College, I know, actually I recognize a lot of you in the classroom today, don't give up, finish, even if you're a class away, get it the next year, but stick it out and get that associate degree. It's going to be worth everything to you later in life, and you may not know that now, but it certainly will be later in life.
Thank you. How many of you are considering striking out on your own eventually someday? You'd like to have your own company, doing your own thing? Yeah. Good. So yeah, some really good words of wisdom here. Randy, can you talk a little bit about how you started out at San Marcos and then got to where you are now?
Sure. I mean, I like I mentioned, I was working at a retail nursery and kind of got cold called into San Marcos Growers. I started as production and shipping manager, which meant I drove the truck too. I mean, it was a little bit of a smaller nursery back then, and eventually worked my way up, production manager. In about 1991, I became general manager of the nursery and got some ownership of it. Worked on that with at the time it was founded by a woman named Marcia Constance, who's still to this day is our queen of the nursery, but she has no ownership in it. But she started it with the idea of starting a nursery that was going to supply trees to Santa Barbara Beautiful, which you might all know is an organization here in town that supplies the trees to the city of Santa Barbara, the unusual trees. So we started as a tree nursery. What I brought with me was kind of a general knowledge of Mediterranean plants and California native plants in particular. And so we expanded on that, and really I've worked at increasing the palette of the nursery in that direction. Interestingly, in the last 15 years, it's actually gone in a slightly different manner. We still grow a lot of the same plants, but we're also adding a great deal of succulents to that mix, which has become kind of a standard now in the nursery trade. So many of us kind of look at these plants as being kind of the future water conserving nature that they have. And so we're kind of a balance. We're up at about 40% of the plants we grow now are succulents. And but the other ones, what has gone out of our palette really has been the non-water conserving plants. We've dropped our water garden lines, for example. We used to do a lot of more tropical plants and actual water lilies and things like that. So we're still growing a lot of the Australian and South African plants that, that make up a lot of the Mediterranean plants as well as California native plants. And so that's kind of my route up into San Marcos growers.
Thank you. Kim, I was wondering if you could share about your experience in your area and tell these folks here if you feel like there is enough work in Santa Barbara. Can somebody support themselves, and where do you see that occupation going in landscape architecture?
Gosh, every one of my friends that has a firm right now is looking for somebody. I'm looking for somebody, and there aren't enough landscape people out there. Designers, people with a degree in landscape architecture, and a lot of people who get degrees in landscape architecture don't know plants. And so I think starting off with horticulture and then getting educated in landscape architecture as a bachelor's or a master's is a really good way to go. Because the architecture, it's about design. It's about using space and sort of there's inside architects and we learn how to be outside architects, and plants are just one part of it. And so I think learning about the soil and everything you learn here is really important. So I would say right now, I know of at least 3 or 4 firms in town that are hiring. So I know there's jobs in landscape architecture, and it seems like a lot of the contractors I work with, everyone is just so busy right now, and everyone's trying to hire. I think there's a big market right now for people who know how to properly take care of and water plants. Program irrigation controllers, that's a huge, it sounds kind of silly, but nobody knows how to properly program an irrigation controller. So I think there's a lot of niches out there, and there's a lot of opportunity to, in my mind, bring positive things to the community and help all of us conserve resources. And so I think there's a lot.
Thanks. Would any three of you like to respond to that question as well, as far as marketability right now for these students?
That's all I ever talked about in class.
Yeah.
You did bring it up early on.
No, I mean, that's really it. When I was here in the construction and the irrigation classes, it's all I ever really wanted to talk about. I mean, of course, the class material, but the potential, the opportunities, the reason why people fail that are doing this, and how to not fail. Again, being able to tell a client or a potential employer that you have finished the program at City College is a huge leg up on somebody that comes to me that says, I've worked for my dad. Okay, well, who's your dad? Is he, a farmer? Is he a contractor? Is he a gardener? Is he a minister? Like what does that mean? He's, which is, again, I've taken in young men and women that have done all of that have come from a variety of backgrounds, and invariably the people that have a little bit more experience and have a higher level of education, they literally start on the ladder at a higher rung. So that's the first important part. The second thing that Kim hit the nail on the head when she said we just need people to be able to program irrigation controllers. Okay, so the state of California in particular has taken upon itself to highly regulate the landscape industry, much more so than any of the other 50 states in the union, and I mean much, much more so. However, the state of California also offers for the green industry probably the best opportunity to sustain yourself as a self-employed person, okay? So if you are intelligent and understand the rules and regulations, and what I mean by that are how to manage a smart controller, how to install something as simple as a backflow preventer properly, how to perform work that is code compliant. All of those things will give you a much better advantage in the marketplace. Word does get around, it spreads fast, it is a small community. You know, people like me that have the opportunity to pick and choose the subcontractors they work for, the employees they have, to recommend people to jobs at Lotusland, to recommend people to jobs at San Marcos Growers. We really want to promote the men and women in this business that are talented. So get some talent, and that'll help a lot.
Great.
Marketability, Adam talked about more education in managing people or accounting, and that was something I didn't think of, and that makes yourself more marketable as well. I always thought I'd just be a greenhouse grower and I wouldn't have to manage too many people, and then I got kind of moved into this position. But yeah, just keeping your mind open, and when you're looking for a job, you may be looking for one specific type of job that you want to do. You may find yourself in another situation doing something you didn't think you'd be doing, but liking it. It's just another, something to put on your resume and to do well and do as best you can with your knowledge that you have, and moving up from there. But yeah, just spread your fingers out as far as you can and try and touch as much as you can while you're young, especially, and yeah, get the experience.
Well, you're talking about young people, so my company we're 37 years old now, 36, 37 years old, and an aging workforce. Most of my management staff is my age or older, and we've kind of had a couple retirees, and we've looked at the younger generations, and we've hired out of programs like this, and always. And one of my most recent hires was someone out of the Mount Sac Horticulture program, which was our propagation manager. And then recently we hired into our sales department someone that had a certified California nursery certificate, which is a great thing to have. It's not I don't think there's any nurseries in Santa Barbara that do this, but quite a few that are nurseries in Southern California, Northern California do it. It's a pretty extensive thing. It's a certificate. And those are all positive things, and we look for those kind of things in the employees we're hiring, and I was quite happy to find this guy with that certificate. So, but definitely out of this program, I'm looking at this program all the time, where we do post jobs to this program, and I think it's a great program to hire from.
Thank you. With that, we'll open it up for questions, and anybody, just go for it.
Soil science.
People skills.
People skills. I would say if you're interested in design, art, watercolor, painting, understanding color theory, understanding space and light, contrast, that's really important. Our landscape architecture program, we actually took sketching classes and watercolor, oil painting, just to get that creative side. And then also there's the whole science, the background in science of understanding soil chemistry, and if you get a soil test, how much nitrogen do they need to put in, and are we low on sulfur, and just understanding what a soil test means, or going to a site, seeing something sick, just having those diagnostic skills beyond just knowing the names of the plants. Watering again. I think those are some important things, but with design, really, I think art and color and space, understanding space, how people use space, how people enjoy gardens, understanding exposure, sun and shade, just all those different components. Everyone I've worked with has had bachelor's degrees. with that, I had a bachelor degree in something else and just had a degree from here when I started in landscape architecture. Again, because I could draft in new plants. So there might be, I would think with the design build firms maybe, there's probably some more opportunity. Depends, I think, on the type of company. Maybe you can speak to
Well,
that?
there's also
or- Yeah.
APLD, Association of Professional Landscape Designers. There is, I mean, there's certain things an architect, you need an architect to do, wall heights and things like that.
Code.
Code, or putting things out to bid,
Permit.
that you really need to be a licensed landscape architect for. But there are a whole slew of people that are doing landscape design, like residential stuff mostly, that can do it, and, what? Oh, you want the mic for this?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So historically, about 25 years ago, the Landscape Contractors Association and most of the licensed landscape contractors in the state pushed very hard to have written into the CSLB, that's the State License Board's language, that as long as the design stayed within house, within the firm, you could, in essence, design anything you want, with the exception of habitable space, garages, swimming pools, a few other items that were generally in the purview of the architect and the landscape architect. About 20 years ago, the Department of Consumer Affairs decided that they were going to sunset the landscape architecture license as being unnecessary. This was, unfortunately, in my opinion, supported by the landscape contractors and fought by the architects and the landscape architects. In other words, they wanted to say basically, why do you need a landscape architect's license when you've already given landscape contractors this power to do design build? And the architects have always said, well, landscape architects and landscape contractors, there's such a mix mash of the licensure that they weren't as supportive as they could have been, okay? So I say this is important because unfortunately, and again, this is my personal opinion, but unfortunately, the design build capability of a licensed contractor is high. It's too much. I think that the license is taken too far and that you've got too many landscape contractors doing too much without not just the training, but without maybe the time and the, and the experience on paper. And it unfortunately pushed a lot of the landscape architecture into commercial and into certain jurisdictions here locally. For instance, homeowners associations require you to have a landscape architect on the plan in order for them to even consider it, okay? But short of that, it's almost like a license to steal. And I say that being that thief, that person that does the design build, okay? So you have to get your landscape contractor's license. And at that point, you can design anything you want, but you can no longer sell that design to another contractor or to another client. In other words, they can't hire you specifically for the design, you get paid for that, and then you get moved off the job. You're basically obligated to stay and finish it, otherwise you're not supposed to be able to charge for the design. I don't know if that makes any sense. But this is a very misunderstood aspect of the way that the license board code is written, if you will. I think it's important personally that we have a good distinction between landscape architects, and that requires about 6 years of combined training, whether it's working for another landscape architect, going to school, having some experience as a contractor, having some experience as a landscape designer. But generally, just as a private landscape designer, towards the actual license, you'll only get 2 years of, if you're out by yourself and you've got a business, it'll only get you about 2 years. And the other 4, you'll have to go out and work for somebody else like Kim. You'll have to come back to City College and pick up another year, go to a place like Berkeley, Cal Poly, Pomona, or San Luis and get a 4-year degree to pick up a few more years. But they're very, it's very difficult. They've made it much more difficult than it used to be. Did you find that it was, when you first started, the path to landscape architecture was a little shorter and straighter than it's gotten recently.
You could apprentice under someone, and now you have to have a degree
Yeah.
from an accredited program.
When I graduated, they said but the getting the actual landscape architecture license, that C27s, in other words, landscape contractors with experience could petition the Department of Consumer Affairs to sit for the LA test, and I was like, that's insane. And a guy that I was working with a lot named Brad Bartholomew actually did that. And he is a licensed landscape architect, but since then, that law has changed. So I can no longer, in the position I'm in now, being like 1 year short, I'd have to beg Kim for a job and go work for her. And she'd have to basically sign off that I'm a capable landscape architect before I could sit for the test. However, let me just back up. On a very limited basis, if it's just plant selection and plant design and minor hardscape development, I'd say you're safe. But even landscape contractors get sued left and right for making mistakes, and we always have our license to fall back on, our contract that we've written to fall back on. But as just a landscape designer with no professional licensure to protect you, you won't get paid, one, and two, you're likely to be sued and lose. So I'd say you can do it, and on a small scale, you'll probably be fine, but at some point, you're gonna have to at least get a landscape contractor's license. And most recently, the craziest thing they've done now is they've approved landscape contractors to do swimming pool construction and design, which I've also found to be somewhat out of the range of most people that have never seen or touched rebar and concrete. So it's just whoever lobbies the hardest in a way gets their agenda pushed forward.
If you're going for a certain type of career in design, a master's would make sense, but I don't think it's necessary. Cameron, who works for me, he went to Berkeley and got a bachelor's in landscape architecture, and he's great. And so it's really, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. It just was the path I took. But I think the bachelor's definitely is. And in my opinion, the UCLA design program is great, but it's a certificate program. And if you're going for 3.5 years, why not go an extra quarter and get a degree? So that seems like I think you get a more rounded education that way. There's some really good programs, and considering the cost of getting a master's degree, I think, I would say start with the bachelor's, try out the career, see how you like it, and then, if you need that advanced situation, then go for it. I was just in the position where, I had been the grocery manager at the Ivy Food Co-op forever with a bachelor's degree and wanted to do something different. So that's where I went. Yeah. Arcadia, I guess, a lot of the firms in town are hiring in around between $20-25 an hour, depending on your experience. I think if you've got a number of years under your belt, you can make $60,000 to $80,000. Some of the firms in LA, people are making $100,000 and $110,000. The municipal jobs, landscape architects for like universities and cities, they all make around $90,000 to $120,000. So it can vary. But the thing about landscape architecture is, I carry $4 million worth of insurance, and I pay a lot. There's a lot. You have general business insurance and liability insurance and unhired auto insurance, and I'm very well insured. So there's being an employee of a company, there's that. It's nice to just try test drive it and learn the ropes from somebody else, and then go out on your own, which is kind of I got to see somebody make some mistakes and learn from that, and so I kind of run my business a certain way, and it's good to kind of get that work from somebody else and apprentice under somebody and, really learn the ropes that way. Being under somebody's wing, I think, is a good option. One more. Yeah, it seems like it's growing. I would say habitat restoration, definitely. Definitely habitat restoration. I think it seems like permaculture is becoming more mainstream, and it seems like a lot of people in Santa Barbara, the homeowner level, are looking for that. Somebody can come in and kind of help them with their food gardens and that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of interest there, and I don't know that there's a lot of people providing that service. Yeah.
As it becomes more of a private industry-driven trade, there'll be more employees, more positions available. But up to this point, it's been predominantly a government or a municipality-driven, restoration. I think the work that's happened around UCSB and whatnot that's more institutionalized, but now that, like a place like Decker's, when they were doing their building and their design, they really had to do a lot of consideration for the environmental related work. So as the private sector picks up the amount of work, I see that as being probably the new frontier for horticulture, is trying to try to take the horticulture out of horticulture and go with more of a natural, non-manipulated environment. So it's like we're going to manipulate the environment to be a non-manipulated ecosystem when you're done, And those majors didn't exist when in the late 80s when I was in school. And now even our department, the environmental horticulture department, used to be either the ornamental horticulture departments or just the horticulture departments. So we're tacking on the environmental even onto the name of the study of the call it a skill, the trade, I think is an important indication that we're moving in that direction.
I think Sieber's got, 80 acres of habitat restoration for the ocean meadows right now. They need people. They're just starting to plant. And the Diehl Center for, Biodiversity and Ecological Restoration, CCBER, out at UCSB. So they're turning the Ocean Meadows Golf Course back into the Upper Devereux Slough. And there's, they need irrigation techs, they need people just out in the field planting, maintaining, monitoring what's growing, what's not growing, working on their adaptive management plan to, switch gears. And there's the Ormond Beach wetland plan, that's going to start going in. That's 640 acres of coastal restoration. So there's at Oxnard Plain. Yeah, so there's, I think as people are starting to understand the implications of sea level rise and how fragile coastal environments are, there's a big push right now to expand wetlands and to make our coastal wetlands and river mouths and creek mouths more adaptable and resilient to sea level rise. And where are the migratory birds going to go? So I think that's going to be at the forefront if you're interested in that.